Welcome back, or welcome to the Rebel Tech Podcast, where we discuss the promises and perils of all things emerging technologies. I'm your host, per usual, David Dunmoyer, Associate Vice President of Campaigns at TPPF. And in today's show, we're going to talk more about the perilous side of technology. And as somebody who's a researcher and an advocate in this space, I oftentimes myself get lost in the data and in the free market components of technology and development. But as advocates, as lawmakers who might be listening, or anyone who's in this field, it's important to remind ourselves why we are doing this thing, why we are in this fight to protect children online. And to me and to our guests today, it comes down to the people, the children who are affected by what I would consider to be an unfettered technological experiment on our kids, where we're starting to see real time the outcomes of not having guardrails in place to protect them. And so with that introduction, I am so pleased to have today with me on the show, Maurine Molak. And I could give an extensive biography. I think I want to keep this to my heart, and what I've heard from lawmakers who speak of you here in Texas so highly. You are a fierce advocate. You have turned a personal story, a tragic one, into a redemptive arc of hope and passion for so many parents, lawmakers, and folks across the country. And professionally, you are the co-founder of David's Legacy Foundation, among other organizations we'll get into today. But then personally, you're just a fierce advocate who's fighting in the trenches. And so thank you for being with us today, and welcome to the show, Maurine.
Thank you, David. It's great to be here today. Thank you.
Well, first I have to ask you, as we were kind of chatting beforehand, how are things? How's everything going for you? Sessions over in Texas, things are picking up in DC. So what's life looking like for you these days?
Yeah, it's hectic right now. We are trying to get the Kids Online Safety Act across the finish line, and we just have a little bit longer than a year to get that done. So looking forward to discussing that today.
Absolutely. Well, we're definitely going to get into that. Again, talking before the show, for folks who found, Maurine's coming to the show, this is going to be a great conversation. What I kept hearing is, I want to hear the unfiltered story of Maurine. What led her to really heeding God's call to get involved in this space? You're not a technologist. This isn't something, 20 years ago, you've been a public policy professional. You have a unique story, and I'd love for you to just share that to our audience, however you see fit.
Yeah, first of all, I'm just a parent. And I'm not a public speaker. I think the only political activism that I ever did before I got involved in this work was voting. And so, it was 10 years ago when I lost my 16-year-old son, David, to suicide. And the year prior to David's death, he was battling a social media and online gaming addiction. With the last 3 months of his life, he was the target of relentless and threatening cyberbullying by a group of classmates at his school, to the point to where he was fearful about going to school, and we ended up having to change schools and move him away. And we had the means to be able to send him to a private school to be able to try to get away from his perpetrators.
Yeah. If you don't mind me asking, this is one of the things that we hear, just more the anecdotal side in conversations I've had with parents who have suffered tragic losses such as you did. The signs aren't always clear up front until sometimes it's so far in where your son or daughter is struggling with something that sometimes the parent doesn't know. So I don't know if you can speak to what did that look like in terms of how fast the onset was?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let me give you a little bit of history of my family. So David was the youngest of 3 boys. Mm-hmm. There was a pretty good age difference between my oldest and David. David was born in 1999. So in the early 2000s, that's when we saw the rapid advancement of technology. Mm-hmm. And I'll be really honest, I drank the Kool-Aid. Mm-hmm. All I heard during those years were you needed to, make sure that your kids were up to speed on the newest and greatest technology, and you needed to have computers, and you needed to have all of these different devices in your home. Otherwise, your kids were going to be left behind. Mm-hmm. So David grew up during that period of rapid advancement. But he had balance in his life. He was a basketball player. He was a good student. He was a Boy Scout, actually achieved the rank of Eagle Scout right before he died. But because of a basketball injury, David, the rehab was really, really long. And during that period of time, he turned to social media and online gaming to fill that void. And after about 8 months, I started to see a real change in his behavior. I mean, he was showing all of the signs of a behavioral addiction, from lying about completing his homework. He was sneaking around using his devices when they were supposed to be charged down in the kitchen. He would get angry and aggressive when we would try to get him to stop. And then there towards the end, he started stealing from us in order to purchase virtual assets to increase his player power through some of these gaming platforms. And, it was at that time when we knew that we were up against something that we didn't have any experience with. We had not experienced that with our older two sons. And David was getting mental health supports at that time. And that's when the cyberbullying started. And it was just the final match on a huge bonfire that exploded in our home. And it was a crisis moment when we were trying to seek help from law enforcement and the school and lawyers, anybody that could help us at the time to be able to get the cyberbullying to stop. And we hit roadblocks. And that's why we started after David died. You can imagine it took me a long time to be able to even function. But we knew that we wanted to honor David by passing laws so that no other family would have to walk in our shoes.
And let's talk about that, because, David's Legacy Foundation and all that came after that. So what kind of resulted in you deciding to say, hey, I want to turn this into something positive? What did that look like to create the foundation and then go on to pass David's Law?
Yeah, I think, when at the very beginning, Senator Jose Menendez was holding a town hall in San Antonio. Just by coincidence, he was working with another family in San Antonio whose child was being cyberbullied. And it was right around the time of David's death. And my husband and sons went to that town hall and met with him. And he said, we need to pass a law, and we want to do this to honor David. And we knew that there needed to be tools for parents and schools and law enforcement that didn't exist when we were going through it. And so that just sort of started the momentum. And the good thing about it was in the off year of session, so we had a whole year to work on it and meet with any stakeholder that would be impacted by this legislation. So we met with superintendents and school board members, law enforcement, mental health professionals, DAs, you name it. We tried to meet with anybody that would talk to us and help us figure this out. And that's when we came up with David's Law.
Yeah. And so, walk our listeners through David's Law. What was kind of the vision? What does that look like now that's been the law for, almost a decade at this point?
Yeah. So it's a comprehensive bill. It affects the education code, the civil code, and the criminal code. So we updated the penal code to up to technology standards. So before it talked about fax machines and pagers, and we just added the new ways that kids were harassing others through social media and iPhones and that type of technology. And then the education code, I think probably there's lots of provisions that were changed in the education code to address this, but the most meaningful one was giving schools the explicit authority to investigate and take action against cyberbullying incidents if they materially affected a young person's educational opportunities. And so that was one of the things that we heard from superintendents quite a bit was they didn't feel like they had the jurisdiction because often it originated off campus, outside of school hours, and they wanted to be able to address it because they knew the damage that it was causing young people. So we gave them that explicit authority through the education code, through David's Law.
Okay. And that, kind of thinking about the whole timeline at play years, I was born in 1995, and my younger brother born in 1999. And I saw growing up, yes, MySpace, and I had a phone when I was in junior high, just a flip phone, but a diametrical shift in 4 years, what difference that made. And I think particularly me as somebody who was close enough to my brother's age to where I was more techno savvy than my parents at that time, I still didn't comprehend the extent to what he went through as opposed to me. And it was to the point where My mom and dad pulled my brother out of a school, similar story, and into a more private school system that helped him avoid that. So I just share that because you're making me realize too that 4-year delta between me and my brother, all the difference happened because everything happened so immediately all at once.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And I will say, the tragedy of this story, it is a beautiful vested blessing that there were lawmakers in Texas who not just listened to you and heard your story, but said, let's fix this. And that's a testament, I think, to Texas in terms of what we prioritize and what we value here. You also spent a lot of time in D.C. And so this isn't me setting up to say D.C. is the worst at all swamp dwellers, but I think you had a unique experience in Texas. So let's kind of juxtapose that with you've been in the trenches fighting for multiple kid safety bills at the federal level. What has your experience been like working federal advocacy as somebody who went from never thought I'd be involved to the face of kid safety in Texas and now national? What's that been like?
So completely different. I'll be really honest.
Okay.
Yeah. I thought it was when we passed David's Law in 2017, I thought that was hard.
Right.
I had no idea how hard it was going to get something through Congress. I've been at this for 3 years up there in D.C., have taken about 15 trips up there to advocate for kids, telling my story, working with other parents from across the nation to talk about the vast harms that our kids are experiencing online and trying to get them to actually do something about it. Because we really do need a federal standard to protect kids online. And we're seeing more states get frustrated, the fact that Congress hasn't been able to do anything, and they're passing their own laws. And we want them to be able to do that. We want states to have the autonomy to be able to protect their own people of their state and make sure that we have some strong state laws like we've done here in Texas. And I'm really proud of the work that we've done here in Texas. We're actually leading the way in online safety for kids.
Yeah. No, and amen, and testament to federalism and, the idea UT Austin says what starts here changes the world. And of course, to your point, that hasn't fully set in at the federal level just yet. So you mentioned a lack of framework on tech policy. We've talked about this multiple times in the podcast here. But from your perspective, now that you're in the trenches fighting, when you look at the federal laws that are in place in Washington, D.C., what is that relationship between federal laws and parents on the ground? Describe that disconnect that you've seen.
Yeah, so I think... that's a great question because, there's been multiple hearings, right, in Congress, in the Senate, and in the House to talk about these issues, and nothing has been done. I think the conversation that I was having 3 years ago when I first started this work in D.C. is very different than the conversations that I'm having today. Yeah. So I think that we're seeing a shift, and we're seeing the members really understand the gravity of these harms and the fact that we've got to put, social media companies, the business model is not in line with family values. It actually pits children against parents and parents against children, and it's not a fair fight for families. And I think that they're seeing that. I just don't think we can agree on the solutions. And, I am one to say, let's work together. Let's find a solution. Doing nothing is not an option because kids are being harmed, and we have a moral responsibility and a responsibility to God to protect vulnerable populations, and our children are our future, and we have an obligation to protect them.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned this, there's been a change nationally, although it hasn't necessarily been met with policy quite yet. What do you find resonates the most when you're talking to folks in Washington, you're telling your story, and they're nodding their heads in agreement, yeah, we need to change this? Is there something you've found just for folks listening who are advocating or maybe considering going to D.C.? What advice do you have to folks who want to get involved and fight in those trenches?
I think the most important thing is to realize that they work for you, and a lot of times we might not think that. But you need to go and share your story. And if you do have a story of an online harm with your child, they need to hear about it, and they need to be able to look you in the face and and tell you why they're not actually able to move forward with legislation. I have a feeling that we're going to see a different outcome this Congress, or at least I'm praying that we see a different outcome this Congress. And the individual stories really do matter to these members. And they all have great hearts. Yeah. There's no doubt in my mind. And they all care about kids. It's just we need to be able to sit across the table and have a great conversation about how do we balance First Amendment rights and protecting kids online. And it's definitely something that we can figure out. We just have to have those conversations together.
Yeah. And one of those solutions is KOSA, Kids Online Safety Act. I don't think we spent a lot of time in this show talking about that. So can you, from your vantage point, what would that proposed bill do? I know there's potentially new language coming, but what's the goal and the vision with that specific bill?
Yeah, so it basically, KOSA is just a common sense bill, right? It puts parents in the driver's seat to be able to protect their kids online. This is about parental rights. Right now, parents don't have rights when it comes to protecting their kids online because it makes the way that the platforms are designed, they have made it excruciating difficult for parents to figure out how to protect their kids on each one of these platforms. It's like playing whack-a-mole. As soon as a parent figures out one platform, three more pop up, and kids are really savvy and they are able to figure out workarounds. And so it's really important that this common sense bill, right, KOSA, has a duty of care, which actually makes the platforms responsible for putting kids' safety first. I mean, that's all it is. Yeah. It's about protecting them from a lot of the harms that we protect them in the real world. Right. We need to be able to protect them in the online world. So that would be things from connecting to drug dealers online. It is about sexual exploitation. It is about kids who are fed algorithms who take them down rabbit holes of pro-suicide content and eating disorder content that they're not even searching for. Right. So every stroke, every pause, every click, every scroll that we do online is being tracked by these companies, and our kids are being tracked by them, and that's what's fueling these algorithms. Right. And what we really want to make sure is that the platforms are made safe, so that's what a duty of care would do. And then there's also a lot of other pieces in KOSA, like there's some transparency and some independent audits, as well as some reporting mechanisms that aren't in place right now for parents to report. So we're not getting meaningful data from these social media platforms. So KOSA would require that, and it would require safety by default, which would mean parents wouldn't have to figure out how to go in and turn on the highest protective settings for their child. Now, they could go in there and relax them. This puts the parents in the driver's seat to be able to make those choices for their children, and that's all we're asking right now is to put parents in the driver's seat.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of incredible points there, and I think it kind of speaks to KOSA is the all-encompassing package that's really accomplishing a lot of the things that have been done in Texas, which we can get into in a moment here, and then speaking to the cultural moment, which is 90% of parents on both sides of the political aisle recognize that they don't have enough power, they're not in the driver's seat. Tech often works against their interests in creating the family values that they see fit. And it's rare, I work in the policy world, much of what is public in terms of ideas and bills that are worked on seem to be the controversial ones. This is one of the most layup obvious solutions that, the 10%, I often think either you didn't read the poll question correctly or you work for big tech if you feel things are really okay. The kids aren't all right.
Yeah.
And you highlighted a point I think I want to drill in on, which is, this the kind of opt-in versus opt-out kid safety options. I know Senator Angela Paxson has worked on in the past device filtering, and this was such a novel concept to some folks. It's really common sense. And to drill down on that, our iPhones and our smart devices right now have an option to turn the obscenity filter to on, but it's a multi-step, sometimes 15-step process to activate it, back to the point of parents don't necessarily have the tools to parent in the digital age. So I'll just ask kind of the more cynical question up front. Why are certain tech companies averse to having kid safety as a default?
Yeah, I think that, I could answer that question in a lot of different ways, but I think the way that I will answer it for today is that as soon as we get our foot in the door and that there's any safety legislation to protect kids, I think they feel like that's going to open up the floodgates, and there's going to be all of this regulation. So they're going to fight.
Sure.
They're going to fight everything. Yeah. And also they're protecting their bottom line. So the longer our kids are engaged on these platforms, the more money that they make. And they also know that they're going to have a user for life. So if they can addict our kids, they're going to have that user for the rest of their life, and they're going to be making profits off of them. These are the most sophisticated companies that have ever really existed out there. And it is like I said earlier, it's not a fair fight for parents. And we're up against something that a lot of us don't understand. You know, I'm a late baby boomer, so didn't grow up with technology. It wasn't until I was out in the workforce that really technology was introduced. And so and as a parent, that made it extremely difficult. And then if you think about, our population in Texas, of the number of families who maybe English is not their first language, or lower socioeconomic, lower education, those are barriers to protecting their kids online.
Yeah. No, well said. And to bring it back to the more optimistic, again, I think in Texas in particular, and states like Utah, Florida, others are following suit, but Texas seems to have the most holistic approach that we're taking on a state level to addressing the issue of kid safety. And I know you've been involved in, if not all those fights, close to all of them. I think it's safe to say all of them. What are some of the bills that are now law or soon to be law in Texas that you've worked on that you feel is a good model for the rest of the country to follow suit on?
Yeah, so I think 3 of those come to mind. So securing kids online through parental empowerment, children online through parental empowerment, SCOPE bill, was a great bill, and of course being challenged currently, and we'll see how that plays out in court. And I know that some of the provisions are, the judge did stay those, and so we have see those go into play. And interestingly enough, the platforms that I've tested are not in compliance with those safeguards, and I know that our Attorney General Ken Paxton has filed some suits against TikTok for sure, because they are not in compliance. And I believe that those other platforms as well, Meta is not in compliance as well, from what I've tested myself. And so I think it's really important for us to be able to see how that plays out in the court system, because it was a really good bill, and maybe there are some modifications that we could do to that next session to shore that up. I feel really strongly about safety by design. And these design features that these platforms are using, which fuel that addictive behavior in our kids, the compulsive use behavior in our kids, that keeps them scrolling and keeps those notifications on throughout the night. They are losing sleep. And so those are the types of things that we need to be able to address. Another bill that I was very supportive of was what we passed last session, was the phone-free school bill in Texas. And it was something that I knew needed to happen 10 years ago, when we had those phones in schools. And I was, I always thought to myself, like, how did we get here? Like, how did this happen? Like, why are we even allowing these in our classrooms in the first place? And then as I saw technology evolve and how that was being, from TikTok challenges for the destruction to schools, from cyberbullying, from the fights that kids were negotiating through social media, and then they would go and film those fights, and then they would upload them just to see what kind of like counts that they could get. It's all about social influence, and just all of the other vaping that was happening in the bathrooms that they were, working on together through social media to meet up in the bathrooms. So that was really something that was really important to me. So I was really pleased to see us get that legislation pass, that we can get those completely out from the entire school day, because that is the only way to do this right. And we're protecting the mental health of our young people by doing that, as well as really teacher engagement definitely goes up when they don't have to be the phone police. And that's what we've been doing. So.
Yeah. It occurred to me recently, someone was telling me a story about the day Charlie Kirk was assassinated and kids were in school. And for the first time, the tragedy being what it was, parents were often the ones able to have that conversation with their kid. And, I think of a lot of the bills from last session, there's so many great wins, but that's one where you're seeing the immediate effects.
Right.
And it takes, that 2 to 3 week detox period, I think is what some teachers are calling it, where kids are gnashing and screaming and I want my phone back. And then finally they kind of recalibrate and teacher has control of the classroom. Kids are more engaged and they're socializing. And so you mentioned, SCOPE, phone-free schools. Was there one more I cut you
App
off
Store
on?
Accountability Act. I was a supporter of that. I really feel like that is a great tool to have. That still doesn't make the platform safer.
Sure.
So it's another tool that we need in the toolbox. I think there's many tools that we need. But until these platforms are made safer, we're going to continue to have kids that are going to be harmed. And so we've got to be able to have design legislation.
Right. Yeah, thinking back to the SCOPE Act, so that was the 2023 session, and I remember very distinctly, we're newer to this game. We had just started our tech initiative about a year prior to the ADA session, and our board and going through the process of what's our agenda going to be, our line in the sand was social media is an addictive, harmful product, and it needs to be treated as such. And whether it's a pornographic content, and so you know the whole story.
Right.
And I remember having a meeting with a legislative office, and we're pitching this idea of kids' online safety legislation well before session started. And the direct quote was, "There's a snowball chance in hell this is going to happen." And then 4 months fast forward, that bill gets introduced by, I think it was Representative Slauson and then Senator Hughes in the Senate.
Right.
And it became a speaker priority bill. It gained momentum. And that to me was such a eye-opening moment of what advocates like yourself and the grassroots that mobilized around this. And it was really a perfect example of the insulated effect of when offices are only talking to big tech or certain interests, like, well, the issue's bad. It's not really that bad. And then you start getting the stories out. And I really think that's what's shifted in my eyes in the last 4 to 5 years is, we talk about elevating the harms just so lawmakers and others can recognize, these aren't theories. There are real effects. And whatever you think, it's probably 10 times worse than that. And there are unfortunately so many stories you can point to. So to jump off that, I think now there's more momentum. You mentioned nationally with some of these efforts with KOSA and in Texas. Now every conversation I seem to have with lawmakers is what more can we do? So in your eyes, what more do you think we can do with SCOPE in Texas? And maybe, what can we expect Maurine to be working on next session in Texas?
Yeah. Well, I would love to see us be able to look at SCOPE and see how we could tighten that up so that we can get that through, or even a new design code bill. Right. I think a kids code bill is really important that we do, especially if Congress doesn't act on KOSA. We need to be able to do that here in Texas. I think AI chatbots is the next thing we need to be able to address. I think it's very important. I mean, we have a family here in Texas that just was at a hearing in D.C. and spoke about what happened to her son with an AI chatbot. I think it's really important that we're looking at these algorithms and that are addicting our kids and providing content that they're not even searching for just based on what these platforms decide that they want them to see. It's all about enragement and the engagement. And the more volatile information and the more, dangerous content that they can see, they know they have the behavioral scientists, right, that are working for them and know what's going to glue kids onto these screens and keep them there and keep them there in the middle of the night as well. So we have a lot of work to do. I believe that we are up for that challenge here in Texas. Absolutely. I'll never forget the first time I met Representative Slauson. And she was lovely, and I told her David's story and talked to her about the work. I'd already started working in D.C. on KOSA, and we talked about that. And, she recognized the fact that Congress was moving way too slow, and they were doing nothing to protect kids, and that's why she took this on as herself. And I was very proud of the work that she did and being able to work with her on that bill. And so, I think we got to have more work to do, and we can do it, and let's get it done.
Yep, and that's, we have the biennium, we have a year to get all the good ideas out, and I know you're going to be spearheading those, so more to come on that. So I also want to ask, I recently learned that there is another organization that you have co-founded, and it's Parent SOS. Give you a chance to talk about, what was the impetus for founding that, and what is the goal with that organization?
Yeah, so these parents, it's 20 parents who have lost their children to various online harms. And we are a small representative of the amount of people and the amount of families out there who have children who have been harmed. So I want you to think about this from the standpoint that we've lost everything. Like, we have lost a member of our family, a child, like a part of our body. So many other families out there who are suffering right now still have their children. And so a lot of them don't want to come forward and tell their child's story. Perhaps they might re-victimize their child in these particular situations. So we are really their voice. And we have been walking the halls in D.C. for the last 3 years together, walking those same halls that those Meta lobbyists and TikTok lobbyists and Google lobbyists are walking. We may go into an office right after them. Yep. And
you can smell the stench.
The millions of dollars that have just even been spent just so far this year alone to lobby against KOSA is almost unfathomable. Yeah. And these families will go in there and tell the story of the worst days of their life, and in hopes that we can get Congress to take action. And we were there, a lot of us were there together in January of 24 when the 5 big tech CEOs were testifying in the Senate Judiciary Committee. And, I'll never, forget even Ted Cruz, coming down hard on Mark Zuckerberg, and Josh Hawley coming down hard on Zuckerberg. I mean, there were so many great sound bites at that. I walked out of that hearing. I was not but 20 feet behind Mark. I was right behind Mark Zuckerberg when he turned around and he apologized to the parents. And for a parent whose child had been harmed on Instagram, on his platform, and to have that apology be so hollow and shallow, it was just almost insulting to the parents. And I walked out of that hearing thinking, gosh, you know what? We're going to see something happen this year. Those congressmen, those senators, they meant business. But here we are again. This year, we were able to pass KOSA last year out of the Senate 91-3, bipartisan, huge win. I mean, you don't see that kind of action in Congress. And this year, it's been reintroduced. And those 20 families that I've worked with that share the worst days of their lives are still pounding those pounding those halls in Congress. And telling their stories in hopes that no other family has to walk in our shoes.
Yeah, I did not know you were there for that hearing. Yeah. I mean, you already answered. If you want to expand on this, I mean, what was that like to see that? I mean, hollow platitudes, but what was the sense for all the parents who were there when Zuckerberg turns around and gives that feigned apology?
We were really surprised that it happened when Josh Hawley made him stand up and do that. And, there were so many different pieces of that hearing, where Mark Zuckerberg basically says there's no correlation between mental health and and what children are experiencing on his platforms, and he's trying to do better, and all of these things that he said, and he probably took the worst hit of all of them for sure, as well as Snapchat, and so I think those are two really those are the two platforms that we see a lot of these harms, especially the design of Snapchat. That platform in itself is just notorious for, the connecting kids with drug dealers through the Snap Maps and we could go down, we could talk about that one, for a very long time. But it's just really important to know that those parents that were in that room, that there were moments of just utter silence, like you could have heard a pin drop in there. And just being that close to those CEOs that we know have the power to be able to make the change, and they refuse to do that. Now, I will say Linda Yaccarino with X, they have endorsed KOSA. And we do know that, X has got some issues on its own right, but she has definitely been a supporter of KOSA. Snapchat says they're a supporter of KOSA. They've come out and endorsed it, but we're just not really so sure about that. Sure. And Microsoft
it's kind of like their app, it disappears after a while, their endorsement.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we're trying to figure that one out, how they can justify that. But, I just think it's the parents, we felt heard and respected by those members of Congress in that room. Unfortunately, we weren't able to see anything happen last year. They didn't follow through, and we're hoping that they will follow through this Congress.
I'm just thinking about this, from, I guess, the direct bottom line scale. You talking about Parent SOS, and it's 20 parents who are in there giving up their time, they're volunteering, it's hard stories they're sharing, walking to offices, sharing those stories. And then meanwhile, tech is literally spending millions to lobby to say, we want more of that.
Yeah.
That's as, I think, stark as it gets. But, we're not going to say it out loud, but let us handle it. This is the argument we keep hearing over and over again in testimony. I always say, it's platitudes and vain promises, and that's what they keep doing. PG-13 standards on Instagram, and a month goes by and it's all for naught. Or these, voluntary rollout agreements. And so it's kind of getting me to my question, which is something that we hear in the conservative movement. And, how do you what is the conservative stance on tech policy? You don't have to answer that, but the question we get most often from the more free market, magic, libertarian class is, well, the market's going to figure it out. So I guess softball question, do you have faith in the market alone to figure these issues out? Incentives be damned for a moment here. Are there companies that are actually taking real steps that you've seen that are worth lauding?
No. I have not. We often see Meta rolling out, these safeguards, right? They rolled out Instagram teen accounts. We've actually worked with a Meta whistleblower, Arturo Bejar, and he tested, like almost 50 of what they claim are safeguards for kids. Most of them either are non-existent, they do not work the way that they are stated that they're going to work. There were only a few, maybe I think 8 out of all of that he tested that actually work a little bit. So they're great about rolling these things out, great PR that they're putting out there, basically saying, hey, parents, we've got you. We've got you covered. We don't need legislation, Congress. You don't need to regulate us. We're taking care of families. They don't work.
Right.
I mean, it is basically, as far as I'm concerned, gaslighting the American people that their kids are safe on these platforms. And they've got, they have a great model. I'll, give it to them for that. I mean, they will partner with organizations out there that and donate money to organizations to promote their work. And in this nonprofit world, as I'm sure that you understand, money is really important to a lot of these nonprofits. And so they know how to work the system very well. They are very good at it. But I just want parents to be aware that these platforms are not safe. And until we have legislation put in place that is with a duty of care, that they have a responsibility, as far as I'm concerned, our children should be off of those platforms, whatever it takes.
Yeah, amen. Amen. So well said. And I'm thinking, if I'm remembering correctly, I think it was on KOSA, the nonprofit partnership. We hadn't worked directly on KOSA at that time, but there was these different think tank organizations sending us letters from, church and faith groups or other communities saying KOSA is going to do this for the LGBTQIA plus community or this for the church community. And I have a keen enough eye because I distrust anything I see that's, oppositional to kid safety bills. I'm like, oh, this is so clearly written by Meta's GR team, and they just put the letterhead of a different organization. And I think it's worth noting, because I'll get to my next question in a second here, they are highly sophisticated in their operations to try and create discontentment or misinformation around these bills. Because to bring it back to how you opened, it's common sense legislation. And if you actually read the text, that's where you see the 90% support. So to ask my final question, and you're incredibly well suited for it, there are millions of parents in America and in Texas that are on the sidelines that may not all be listening to this podcast, but are aware of these issues that are happening that maybe haven't jumped into the fight yet. Maybe it's a grandchild and they're seeing what's happening, spending time on screens, or their kids and not knowing how to deal with this digitized age. What would you say to those parents who see the issue but haven't jumped in because they think they're just not qualified or don't have the time? What's your hoorah speech for them?
You are qualified because you're a parent, and know that you're not alone out there. Like this, what we're talking about today is affecting every single family. When we have 95% of our children are online multiple hours every day, it's not a matter of when. It's not a matter of if your child is going to be harmed online. It's a matter of when and how grave that is going to be. And so to sit by and do nothing, I would just say, join us. Join the movement. Let us help you get involved in this issue. It takes less than 5 minutes to contact your congressman and say, you don't even have to be you don't even have to know about a bill out there. All you can do is just say, you know what? This is a topic that is important to me. Online child protection is important to me, and I want to know how you're going to address that. That's all you have to do. You don't have to be an expert. You just have to ask that question. And this is something that's affecting the future generation, future workforce. If we can't do something about it now and put some, I'm afraid of what's going to happen in the future. And, it's not all about moral panic. It is about the reality that we all know we're in a mental health crisis with our young people, and we all play a role in this. And I think that that we all can do something to make a difference. No,
amen, and well said. And Maurine, I'm going to give you the last word for folks, who want to get involved. If they're not persuaded by that, I don't know what's going to persuade them. How can folks find you, your work, Parent SOS, any of the organizations, if they want to find your work or get in contact with you? What's the best way to do that?
Well, in Texas, they can contact davidslegacy.org. We have a lot of resources on our website. And then parentssos.org. And we actually have a link on Parents SOS where you can go in there, and it'll help you contact your representative directly and help you send that email. Like I said, it takes less than 5 minutes. And the way that we have it designed, you can either make a phone call or you can write an email. And we just need everybody to come alongside us and help us with this fight and let our representatives know that this matters. Kids matter.
Well, again, thank you, for joining me, but most importantly, for being the fearless advocate you are, Maurine. You're an inspiration to myself, so many others, and I'm not just saying that. It's true. I feel it in this discussion today. So thank you for doing what you do, and thank you for joining the show today.
Thank you, David. It was great to be here.